Good afternoon, listeners. It's difficult to understand what the government is doing or what the purpose of what it is that they're doing, what the hidden agenda is, if there is one. But an interesting pop up, if you will. The Canadian government is amending the criminal code. Bill C9 is an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religion or cultural places. Now, one would wonder why you would need an amendment to the criminal code in order to take action against people who are promoting hate speech. And the answer is they want to remove the exemption for religious hate speech. Now, I had a difficult time getting my head around that, thinking, well, what difference? Hate speech is hate speech. It's already against the law. But apparently, if you were a religious person or representing a religious opinion, that was an exemption from hate speech. In other words, you could incite violence against a recognizable group and be exempt from prosecution, which I think is appalling.
And the Conservatives are not in favor of that. It's the Quebec law that made it as part of a deal to support Carney's government, is my understanding. And there are ramifications to this idea of not allowing hate speech to be religious based. Populist movement all around the world use religion as part of their motivation to get people to hate and back their programs.
But it's even the mainstream religions. Like most people think of, the born again Christian radical ideals against, hatred against LBG communities, identifiable minorities, that sort of thing. But even the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops have come out in favor of maintaining an exemption for religious hate speech. It's
Wow.
not just yeah, it's not just the radicals. And here's what they say here: the removal of this provision risks creating uncertainty for faith communities, clergy, educators, and others who may fear that the expression of traditional, moral, or doctrinal teachings could be misrepresented as hate speech and subject the speaker to proceedings that threaten imprisonment for up to 2 years. Now,
Well,
one
that's
one would hope that the court could sort that out, as to what is the definition of hate speech and whether it was intended or not as hate speech. Like, why would you want an exemption for all hate speech? I
well.
I don't
Look at
get it.
Ireland, where the Catholics and the Protestants have been at war for centuries, and I mean, it's based on religion, so there has to be some propagation of promotion that the other people are to be hated, or there wouldn't be a war. Religious base and bias seems to be getting more into the political spectrum, where politicians are catering and pandering to religious groups to get the votes to get in power. And you see that maybe more so here in Alberta, where Smith has just used that notwithstanding clause to go after the LGBTQ community and uh, transgender individuals. And that, to me, is a religion based hatred promotion of individual rights and beliefs and quality of life. So, is this law making it so that the notwithstanding legislation is not valid because hate speech is a criminal act now, and the notwithstanding clause is not designed to silence criminal activity, which is set down by federal legislation?
Well, here's the thing about Alberta. They have no shame about hate speech when it represents hate speech against recognizable groups that they don't like, and they know in advance that what the laws that they're passing violate the Constitution. So they know
Yeah,
that they will be overturned. That's why they're putting a notwithstanding clause in it, regardless of the fact that it has not been tested in court. It's so over the top racist and discriminatory. They know in advance it's exactly what they're doing. Now, here's the thing: if the hate speech exemption for religion says that you cannot discriminate against people not only for religion, say for same-sex marriage, where a religious group says same-sex marriage is a sin,
right.
and they go promoting hatred against people who are in a same-sex marriage,
Well, they
that
do that
is,
already.
yes, that's hate speech. That
Yes.
so they take away the exemption. Those people are subject to imprisonment. The notwithstanding clause will not shield them from the criminal law.
No, it
So
shouldn't.
yeah, and the thing is, you have to look at this and wonder, okay, is the enforcement of the constitutional rights of people by the federal government absolutely necessary to cover the Alberta religious fanatics who want to be able to preach hate speech and not be charged?
Yeah.
It
I see this as a good step in the right direction because it is going to separate religious fanaticism from political power and corruption. So I think it's something that is needed. And we cannot have hate speech of any kind in our society. We cannot promote hate like populist movements rely on hate as their motivating underlying movement to enrage people to come out and be vocal and vote for them and offer support. That's counterproductive to anything in democratic governments because all you're doing is promoting rhetoric. You're not coming out with any policies that better the country. All you have to do is look at the hate speech down in the United States and say, we don't want that garbage up here. Alberta's really bad for following the Trumpism and that type of hate mongering, and it's usually related to religious based factions. I mean, the religious people are promoting that Trump is Jesus reincarnated. But does that constitute hate speech or is that just lies? And are they allowed to advertise falsehood and lies to the general population under this law? I think that is something that needs to be dealt with too, that religion cannot spout lies to the population because lies are forms of perjury in certain cases. They are misleading, they're misdirecting, and they affect the way people think. So I think this law has merit, and I think it needs to be expanded so that lies are taken as perjury and cannot be promoted in public or in private for that matter, but it'd be hard to get a conviction in private.
I wasn't aware that religious organizations or individuals that claim to be religious had the ability to spout hate speech and not get charged. I didn't realize there was an exemption in the law at all. And the federal government in 2005 brought in essentially same-sex marriage.
Right.
The Alberta government never really formalized it, although they brought in a definition that they call domestic partnerships, adult inter, interdependent relationships is what they call it. Now,
Yeah.
I assume that their new law is to get rid of that definition and take away that right between parties. And all it did was give people who live together, regardless of sexual orientation, the same rights as everybody else. And so now the conservative government, Smith in particular and her cronies, know that their intention is to remove that right from a select group of people in the province. that is unconstitutional. And
Yes,
the question then becomes, if they've now put hate speech into a legislative document, into the Alberta law, can the federal government have that removed on the grounds that it's against the criminal code? Forget forget the Constitution and the civil rights that people have guaranteed. You know, they can exempt themselves from that, but they can't exempt themselves from the criminal code. I can see an action in Alberta where somebody sues the government saying they're violating the criminal code, maybe go after the ministers of the government, saying that they are in fact criminals for doing this. They're promoting hate speech against a recognizable minority, and trying to
and
exempt themselves from any kind of liability. They should go to jail.
I, yeah, exactly. And that hate speech should not be tolerated in a political campaign, should not be tolerated inside a church, should not be tolerated outside a church. And part of that can be dealt with this new legislation, and I think it's important that we do improve our legislation in that regard.
Now, the other thing that they're adding to this is they're preventing people from demonstrating outside of religious or community specific places on the grounds that their demonstration is hate speech. So, say for example, somebody had a demonstration in front of a synagogue, would they face up to 2 years in jail because it's a religious place and it can be defined as hate speech? Therefore, you can haul people who are out there exercising their democratic rights to free speech away and charge them with a criminal offense. That's the other side of this coin. How
So
is
if
it?
you're
How
in
is
front of a synagogue saying, hey, Israelis, stop committing genocide, you get to go to jail for saying that a religious organization and state is committing genocide? That might not be too good of an idea, but I guess the courts will have to weed through and set precedent on what you're allowed to say. But I do think when you're standing there promoting that somebody's committing international crimes, and you should have the right to stand in front of a religious organization and say, you know, you're the sponsors of international crime, or you're aiding and abetting the organizations that are committing the international crimes. There might be a fine rope between what's legal and illegal in the hate speech. And I guess that's where the Supreme Court would have to set down the limitations. But overall, I see it as a good thing to have. You shouldn't be able to hide behind religion or politics to promote hate, lies, and incite people to act on that hate and lies basis. So we don't want an American system up here in Canada, even though it's already here in many, many regards.
one of the questions is whether or not the law will be applied equally, obviously. So if you wave a Palestinian flag in front of a synagogue, is that hate speech? You know, it'll be interesting to see how the law gets actually applied.
Right.
I'm surprised that it's actually necessary. I was totally
Well,
unaware.
we've gone, you know, like we haven't drawn the line between religion and government. We have used to be a fair means of break, but that doesn't happen now. Okay.
We're back again to the Catholic bishops writing to the prime minister. Their comment is, uh, we are also mindful that existing defenses has been supported not only by Christian organizations, but also by civil libertarians, advocates in view of the important component of Canada's constitutional commitment to freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and pluralism. Now, uh, they say respect of these freedoms is not only a constitutional requirement, but a fundamental element of our national identity. They acknowledge that people have a right to free speech. And when you can determine whether or not that free speech is actually hate speech or not, it's basically on the eyes of the beholder. If one group looks at it and says, "Oh, it's hate speech," for example, if one were to say that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which is obvious, does it then become hate speech against Jews in Canada? And that's an issue that has to be clearly spelled out. And I think what they're doing here is they're trying to weasel around the fact that people have a right to free speech, but it's a limited right when it comes to inciting violence against others. And I I don't know why this was necessary whatsoever. So the
Well,
Catholics, for example, the Catholic Council hasn't popped up and said that what Alberta is doing with their notwithstanding law and discriminating against people, individual rights to choose their lifestyle, is against the Constitution. So they're cherry picking only those issues, only those issues that they feel concern them. And I understand everybody does that. But if you stand
yeah,
up for the rights of freedom and individual freedom in particular, you should be standing up against what the province of Alberta is attempting to do. And I hope this criminal amendment opens up avenues for charges against Premier Smith for hate speech.
there you go. That would be nice. But the other thing would be the Catholic churches have their own independent school system across Canada. And this new law may prevent them from promoting hate speech and hatred within their ideology classes or whatever in their school system, because religion projects that they're the best religion and the rest are not good. So is that hate speech going to follow the Catholic Church and the Catholic separate school system and affect them in the classroom?
Well, from what I can see, reading the general news, most hate speech seems to be directed at Muslims.
Yes,
And yet nobody seems to be up, standing up for prosecuting people who are promoting that hate speech. But if anybody says anything that against Israel, all of a sudden they're hate speech against Jews, and it's how are you ever going to resolve that? Do people have the right to say what they want? And if we're getting this American propaganda by these people who do the podcast down there, we're letting that into Canada, and it's hate
that
speech
has to
coming
be
across the board.
regulated.
How do you do that? How do you
Well,
cut off?
China and Russia only allow qualified service providers and internet providers that meet certain criteria. At some time, this is going to be an issue to deal with in Canada, where we do not allow hate sites or black sites or dark web. That's it. So we got to prevent the dark web from being able to be prevalent in our culture. And I guess we have to look at the media as our news outlets now, because social media is controlling everything. So we do have to have regulations controlling hate speech. And Europe has even now, I think it was Denmark, passed legislation that any of your looks, similarity in looks, your image, your context of your image cannot be used on social media without your written consent. So you have copyright protection of your image and your self-identification on the internet, which I think is an important law. But it's a stepping stone to more control on the internet. And controlling hate speech is something that has to be very well researched and implemented in social media, because that's where you see a lot of it. I mean, one of the religious hate speeches that comes to mind is Sharia law. You hear all these religious fanatics saying, oh, we're being taken over by Muslims, we're going to have Sharia law, and it's all there is, and they're gonna do all this, and they're gonna take over the country, and it's that promotion of immigrants are bad, and they're gonna be implementing their laws in our government, and that's a form of hate speech that should never have been allowed. Some of the nicest people I've ever met were Muslim and of different nationalities than some of the Christians I know that promote hate speech and said Trump is their favorite individual. Well, he's a cover up of a pedophile ring and a felon, and these Christian groups are going around here spouting he's the savior, that Jesus, yeah, he's old Jesus, all right. But they were going around saying, it's all lies about him. He's our chosen one, the priest, the whatever you call them, the bishops, and every religious leader was promoting that Trump was the salvation of mankind, and da 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 da. And that's a form of hate speech too, when you're pumping up a known felon and criminal to get into power to wreak havoc on the world and on the U.S. Poor U.S. I mean, they voted for that, and it does represent their values, morals, and ethics. And they've had less separation of church and politics, and I think they need hate speech laws too. So maybe we can, be assimilated by the U.S. and they can adopt our hate speech laws. I doubt that's ever going to happen, but.
Well, the Catholic bishops say eliminating a clear statutory safeguard will likely, therefore, have a chilling effect on religious expression, even if
Well, I hope so.
even if prosecutions remain unlikely in practice. So they're not the ones that should be really worrying. It's the Alex Joneses and the yeah, well, and the thing is, Alex Jones got his Infowars taken off Facebook, Apple, YouTube, and Spotify in
Right.
2018, so it can be done, right? Jeremy McKenzie, Canadian streamer and podcaster, leading the Die Golly On movement, whatever that is, documented using hate speech in private chats, including anti-Semitic rants and slurs, etc., etc. Rush Limbaugh, seen Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, amongst others.
But why are we leaving this to a handful of people that own those social media sites? We're relying on their ethics, morals, and standards to govern their sites. That's not what government is about. We need the government, our representatives, to stand up and say, we control what you're allowed to promote on those sites, not having, a handful of people say what's right or wrong, and then they have hidden agendas promoting, Trumpism and capitalist values so they don't have to pay taxes on their ill-gotten gains or legal gains. And that is why government has to step in at social media levels too, to control hate speech and improper promotion of agendas that are political in nature to undermine democracy. So I see that as the next wave that's coming as new legislation, and it'll happen in Europe first unless the U.S. totally does an about face on allowing criminal activities and such in their country. But Canada needs to investigate more laws.
So, by way of just a thought, there's laws against Holocaust denial in several European countries,
Right.
Germany, France, Austria, Poland, etc. Now, if you state that there's a Holocaust happening in Gaza, why are you considered anti-Semitic? If it's against the law to deny the Holocaust in World War II, why is it against the law, or why is it against at least the freedom of the press to state that's happening today?
Yeah, it's suppression by he who has the money and the wealth and owns the media.
Oh, wait a minute, that sounds like hate speech to me.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing as if I come up and say, hey, there were millions of people that weren't Jews that were put in the concentration camps in Germany during the war and gas chambers. It wasn't just the Jews. Is that hate speech? It's fact, but is it hate speech because it's telling fact or denying that it was just the Jews that went to the gas chambers, and it wasn't just Jews went to the gas chambers. So therefore, I just breached the law by saying that. So we have to have some controls of what you can say and not say, but I guess time will tell how efficient this law is going to be, but it definitely is needed. I think it's a step in the right direction. And it's going to be interesting, very interesting. Some of you religious people, whether fanatics or just, normal religious people, could you please comment on some of these takes so that we know your opinions on it? I mean, it's interesting. I'm basically an atheist. I don't believe anything unless you can produce fact. So I see all religion as hate speech in one form or another, or lies, or propagation of a man-written book that's a storybook that isn't even as good as Star Wars religious Midi-chlorian-based presentation of super beings controlling the universe. But, for an elementary level book, it's quite a good book. But could you tell me what other areas of hate speech are in there that are what you feel hate speech, or what other religions say of your religion that is hate speech, for clarification, so that, we're not in the dark on some of this because we don't attend your religious beliefs or organization? That would be an interesting topic for comments, and I don't know, some of them I wouldn't be able to respond to, but I'd give it a shot. I mean, discussion never hurt anyone unless you're promoting hate speech in your discussion. So please refrain from hate speech in the discussion, I guess.
Section 319 sub 2.1 makes it an offense to willfully promote anti-Semitism by condoning, denying, or downplaying the Holocaust through statements
Oh, I just committed a
from
crime. Damn, I'm
other
going to
than
jail.
private conversation. Well, the popularity of the podcast here would suggest it was
Oh,
private communication.
yeah. I hope so. I mean, geez, I can't say that not only Jews were gassed in the gas chambers. Holy geez, I'm a Holocaust denier. Wow,
The the
amazing.
first the first charges in October 1st, 2025, they sent a North Bay man to prison for 9 months and two
Well,
years
does that mean if
probation.
we deny the Holocaust in Palestine, we're a Holocaust denier too? Because
Well,
it
well, no,
seems to
it's
be a Holocaust going on there.
it's carefully defined.
Genocide for sure.
It's defined as the planned and deliberate state-sponsored persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by the Nazis and their collaborators from 33 to 45. So it's defined. So it's
Oh,
only
good. Good.
pertains
I'm only facing one charge for saying more people were
it
also thrown in the gas chambers.
only pertains to a specific group at a specific time, which in itself to me sounds I don't know, racist. you
Yeah. Wow.
know,
I mean, it was a horrible, horrible event in history. And the fact that the people that it was perpetrated on are committing what looks like and appears to be, and I have no evidence to the contrary, to be genocide in Gaza and towards the Palestinian people, that is appalling to me. And that is not hate speech, it's just fact. And is it because now I can't hide behind my religion? Well, I don't have a religion. I only want to speak truth, not fiction or fairy tale stories, or try to convince you that my values are what you should believe in. No, believe in what you want to believe, but research and have an open mind for other viewpoints, and discussion on those can be civil. I I once in university in my first year, I stuck a Jehovah Witness, a Christian, a born again, a Catholic, a Seventh Day Adventist, a what other one did I stick in? There were 7 of them. They were all different religious based. I put them in a room to discuss what they thought and why they thought their religion was the best religion, and I would join the one that was best presented to me at that time. So we were in there for 4 or 5 hours, and they were just at each other's throats because they couldn't agree on any part of their religion being sub level to the one next to them. And it was a real eye opener, folks. You could see why religion causes a lot of wars. And I did that under the knowledge that there's not one of them could get along. I mean, we were friends outside of the religious component, and many of us have stayed friends since then, but the beliefs were very different, and there was a lot of animosity and hate towards the other religions, saying they're inferior or not the right religion or such. And that to me was hate speech in that discussion. So this is
Well,
going to be an interesting law.
no, but you remember Ernst Zundel. He grew up in your neighborhood. Zundel?
Yes.
Yeah,
Zundel, he was put in jail, wasn't he?
Well, he handed out a pamphlet that the title was, did 6 million Jews really die? I guess was
right.
the what was the the name of the
Premise
pamphlet.
of it, yeah.
Yeah, and so he then was charged, ended up in the Supreme Court eventually, and
right.
they determined that the criminal code didn't include that as hate speech. It was
right.
unconstitutional.
So
Now, I guess
that would be hate speech under this new law.
But nobody's challenged it as being constitutional or not. And I don't know whether the individual who just went to jail made that appeal or not as the constitutionality of that particular section.
Well, I do remember that incident. I think that was in around the time I put these religious friends in this discussion, because it was very popular at the college where I was taking the first year university courses, and one of our professors was often holding discussions on that. He was a Jehovah Witness, I believe, and he was excommunicated from them, and he brought it out in his classes of here's what's going on, and basically, is it hate speech or not hate speech? And I sort of remember a lot of that conversation where, and I think that's why I made the comment that there were other people in the gas chambers that were gassed in the Holocaust, and the whole affair is bad. But that was one of the discussions that was had with this professor at the time, and he got into a lot of trouble for trying to have an open discussion with us students. They tried to throw him out of being a professor and silence him, and all we were seeking was knowledge. So it was a repressive actions of, you can't talk about this stuff. Well, if you can't talk about it, how are you going to understand it? And how are you going to prevent it from happening in the future? Obviously, the Israelis haven't talked about it enough because they're executing very similar policies against the Palestinian people. So hate speech can be, took in many capacities, but you can't limit the discussions in an intellectual environment to the point of repression or suppression of talk. So they're going to have their handfuls with this hate speech laws. And I guess we've had, problems with it throughout the last decades, and since the Holocaust, I would imagine, being the primary religious suppression act of our times, right?
So you'll get a kick out of this. So Zundel was not his conviction was overturned by the Supreme Court of Canada, and he
Yeah.
moved to the U.S. and
Oh,
yeah,
that might
yeah.
explain some of the actions of the US now.
Well, he moved to the U.S. and he was deported eventually, deported back to Canada for immigration violations, and a federal judge in 2005 said he was a threat to national security and deported him to Germany.
Oh, well, that's
So even
kind of
so even if
funny.
you're even if even if you're a winner, you're a loser, right? So
Right. Well, I mean,
he was immediately arrested when he ended up in Germany. Don't forget he was deported. He didn't really
right.
want to go there, I guess. And in February 2007, a federal court, sorry, German court, I guess it would be federal, convicted Zundel on 14 counts of inciting racial hatred and sentenced
Right.
him to a maximum possible term of 5 years in jail. He was released in 2010, given credit for time served, barred from returning to Canada, and
And now is a US citizen under
no
Trump.
died of a
Trump
died
invited
of a
him.
heart attack died of a heart
Oh,
attack in 2017 at the age of 78.
oh,
So much for freedom
unfortunate.
of speech.
Well, I think what he was promoting was hate speech, and that's what we were trying to find out when we were in university was what the definitions of hate speech were, because some of the stuff he spoke was okay, but a lot of it might not have been okay. And I do agree that he should have been sent back to Germany. That's my underlying take of it anyway, folks. And I think my professor's still alive. He's an immigration lawyer, or was, and I won't say his name, but he's still around as far as I know.
So if you look at that one example for you know just take that one example, people haven't recognized their Armenian genocide to the same degree that they
Yeah,
have, uh, and so you have to look at this as well and say, well, what are the cultural aspects that determine whether or not there's a genocide or not?
I mean,
One of your
we know
favorites,
there's,
the Ukrainian
yeah.
genocide. Yeah,
Well,
how come?
it is a form of genocide going on there where they're
No, no,
intentionally targeting civilians. So,
I'm talking from 1932 to 33, where allegedly millions of Ukrainians were starved to death and
yeah.
executed by the Russian government.
Oh,
Yet
yeah.
talking about that isn't denying that fact isn't a crime.
Yeah.
How come?
I
Like
don't know.
uh,
Well, yeah, we got some, we're diverting a little from the hate speech laws in Canada being updated, but I think international law has to be updated as well in the Hague to make sure that we all know the definitions of hate speech. And with the World Wide Web, we need to have international controls over that hate speech and propaganda to undermine democracies and governments around the world. And that's something that I think you're going to see a lot more discussions on. You're going to see new laws trying to deal with that. And I think it's appropriate in many capacities to do that. Only the future will tell, but I think it's got way out of hand. The pendulum swung way too far in the promotion of hidden agendas and hate speech through social media. And it's controlled by a handful of people who get to say what, where, and when as a culture we get for information. And that in and of itself should scare you people, because that's how propagandists get a toehold and brainwash populations of people. And that in and itself is a same thing as a hate speech, is if you're brainwashing people with lies. So it's going to be an interesting time to see
well,
what happens when this law passes.
let's put the Ukrainian genocide into perspective here. Estimates range from 3.5 to 7 million people. a joint statement of the United Nations in 2003, signed by 25 countries, declared 7 to 10 million died in those 2 years.
Yeah.
Yet it doesn't receive the same attention at all as the Holocaust.
It's not
And they,
based on religion. That's the difference. Even though,
well,
that it shouldn't be. You shouldn't determine, the fatality of groups of people in genocide based on religion having priority of those that are just by location and nationality. So
well,
I don't.
the definition of a Jew is also a nationality, just like the definition of a Ukrainian is a nationality.
Yes, but it's based in the Bible and it's based in religion that they are God's chosen people to inherit the earth, and they have claim to the holy cities and the holy lands, which I'm not sure how that applies in the Bible, but
I don't know
that
how it
means
applies
they're
to anything.
entitled to any land. Basically, they're entitled to any lands they want to claim as being their homelands, and that's how
Well, oh,
they
no, but
became
my
in the Middle
point
East.
is the difference between the two genocides is not religion. Like the Armenian were a people. Now
Right.
they may or may not be made up of all the same religion. Who knows?
I
The
don't know.
Ukrainians were a people that doesn't matter really what religion
Yeah,
they were.
multiple
Who
religions.
knows? Yeah, and so it should at least receive the same amount of attention. You would
Yeah.
think.
Claiming religious persecution has always fueled more worshipers and radicals to support your cause. So, I mean, the rally cry out west here is, oh, we let Muslims in, we're going to have Sharia law. Well, if the law is good law, maybe we should pass some of it. That benefits society, maybe we should pass some of it. But that is hate speech and it is religious based. And when you start looking at religion as a whole, there isn't one religion that gets along with another religion because each one is the golden ticket to heaven or wherever they're going in the hereafter. And they're only held to accountability for their actions by threats that if you're not going to do what we tell you, you're going to hell and you'll be excommunicated from the church. So there, a lot of cases, they're criminals on a leash of threats of if you go against what we tell you, you're going to get excommunicated and you're going to hell. So what type of people are in these churches to begin with is my question, but that's another issue. And there's a few things you don't talk about in podcasts, and they are sex, pedophiles that are presidents protecting pedophile rings. You don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about politics. So I guess we've blown that already. The only thing we haven't talked about is sex. So,
Well, the political aspect of this is you hope that the conservatives that crossed to the Liberal Party did so because they disagreed with the conservative position, at least on this one amendment. And the interesting thing is, of course, is the Liberal government's a minority government. So when they got the support of the Bloc Q, they immediately didn't need the support of the conservatives,
right.
which
So they got
meant it
that
was,
sewed up with this.
yeah, yeah.
But,
They changed their mind.
if another stronghold liberal riding that got a conservative elected, like your riding Windsor, there was only a few hundred votes separating the conservative one, is my understanding. And wouldn't it benefit your riding if he walked across the floor and cut a deal that Windsor would get some grant money to restabilize the car building industry, and when the Griffin jets come in, maybe some of the part manufacturing would go to the Windsor area. So for him to walk across the floor right now would be a career move that would make him look really, really good, and he'll get reelected in the next election because Carney's government has shown that it's doing really, really well, and that would give him strength to get reelected. So there are reasons for a conservative to walk across the floor, and it's to benefit their constituents. So should be interesting to see which one it's going to be. I predict it's your guy going to walk across the floor, but we will see. So on that note, anything else you want people to do? Comment, share, like?
Yeah, I want people to stand up for civil rights in Alberta.
Oh boy. Now you're just asking for me to get bullseye on my head.
Well, it
You
only
don't dare speak up. You don't dare speak up in Alberta, because the minute you speak up, you're ostracized from your local communities, and people don't even want to sit with me in the local bars anymore because I speak my mind. I was told, yeah, don't sit at our table when you come in anymore. Okay, I must have said something that didn't resonate well with them on one of my podcasts, but I think I'm pretty diplomatic and we're pretty level-headed on our podcast. But yep, they told me not to sit with them when I'm out, and that's nice. Not my first time.
anyways,
Okay, on that note, comment, share, like, tell us your religious beliefs and what you feel hate speech in connection with religion is. Thank you. Take care.
good day.
Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.